If you enjoy this video, please be sure to hit that like button. Also, hit the subscribe button and ring that bell for future notifications when additional content is added.
Hi everyone, it's Michelle from Crockett Fantasy of Lights, and I am here today to talk to you about replacing pixels. We're at that point in the year where you were testing pixels from last year, you were finishing up props, you were finally plugging things into your controller, and you might have not tested any of your pixels yet, but as soon as you plug them in, you're going to see that you may have a dead pixel. So I'm going to talk about the 3 different ways we can change one out, and which way you use is up to you. Everyone has their preferences. The first thing is you're going to have your string of pixels. Pixels are great because if there's a dead one, you can just cut it out. So if your dead one is in the middle of a string, which most of the time it is, it's normally not the very first pixel. If the dead one's in the middle of the string, there are ways to tell. They'll light up, and then you'll have one that lights up wrong, or one that won't stay or won't light up at all, or the ones after it'll start being different colors. So our suggestion is you find the first one that's acting funny, and you cut out the one before it, and you cut out the one after it, because it could be this one acting funny because it's bad. It could be this one causing this one to act funny because the data is not going well, or this one could be sending bad data to this one. It's easier to save yourself from cutting and having to replace pixels multiple times to just cut the 3 out. If you know for sure which one is bad, you can just cut one. We do sell 3 pixel replacement strings. I'll show you those in a second that help with this. But let's just pretend this one right here is bad. I don't have it plugged in, but it's bad. So we're going to cut the one before and the one after it out. My suggestion, what I always do, you're not going to be reusing these pixels, and you want to have as much wire as possible. So I always cut right next to the pixel I'm taking out. That way I have lots of extra wire to work with. These 3 then just get thrown away. And now if you're replacing pixels, you can, if you need those 3 back, if it's a string that's in a prop already and you need to replace 3, you're going to replace 3 in. If you have a string of 100 and you only need 80 of them and you have 3 that are bad, then you don't really have to worry about replacing it, and you can just put these 2 ends together. But if you are replacing it, you're going to want to grab, here's a 3 string replacement, or if you have an extra string, you're going to cut 3 pixels off of your extra string to put it in. And that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to talk about our 3 string replacements. We have these little 3 string replacements, or 3 pixel replacement strings, sorry. And so they have already been cut with an extra long wire on the 2 sides that you have to replace, so that you don't have to worry. And we have them in squares and in bullets. They only come in black wire. They do come in 12 volt or 5 volt, depending on what you need. But they do have the longer lead and lead out than if you were to cut it off of a regular pixel like I just did. Where did that string go? So the ones that I just cut off, you can see, even though I cut it with as close to the pixel as I could, I still have a whole lot more wire to work with here. It makes replacing pixels just a little bit easier. Even if I compare the bullets to the bullets here, you can see I have an extra bit of wire there. So these will just pop right back in and pop into place. If you have a white string or a green string, no, they might not match, or they won't match, not might not match. They won't match as far as wire color, but the pixel is the same as any of the other pixels we sell. So the front of it will match if it's going through a prop and people can't see your wires. If you are one of those people that need all your wires to match, then when you're ordering pixels, I suggest ordering an extra string so you have some for replacements. Or if you have a prop, like there's a bunch of props out there that don't take a full 100 or even counts of 50 or 100 pixels, when you cut those off, you leave them somewhere so you have replacements. When you go to replace the pixels, there are a couple things that you need to look at. We're going to look at the squares because they're easier to see. So the first thing you're going to want to look at is you need to make sure that the direction and that you put the pixels in the same direction that you cut them out of, or out of the string. On square pixels, it's really easy to see the direction. There's an arrow, so you know everything's going to flow this way. And then you're also going to need to pay attention to what, I don't know if you can see that, but which wire is the 5 volts, which one is the data, which is the middle, and which one is the ground. On our pixels, and I think it's easier to see, they are written to make it pretty easy. I know a lot of people like multicolored wire. In fact, I have some multicolored wire pixels over here. And people like these because you can tell the blue and the white and the red is which one is which. But on our pixels that don't have multicolored wire, there is the stripe is our ground, the middle is the data, and the one that says 18 gauge, I don't know if y'all can see that through the little camera, but that one says 18 gauge is your volt line, or your 12 volt line, or your 5 volt line. So that's what you need to look at. Like I said, it's easy to see on a square pixel. On a bullet pixel, ours also have arrows. Some of them do not have arrows. It kind of depends on when you order them from us. But if they have arrows, then you know the direction of your data. If they don't have arrows, then you need the side with the words, with the 12 volt, the data, and the ground words is your input side. The other side, as you can see, does not have anything written on it. It's just the board. So that makes this side right here your input side. And so when you go to put these pixels back in a string, you want to make sure all your arrows match up. On some of our older bullet pixels, I went and grabbed them. You can see there is no arrow here, but you can still see that this is the input side because here's your 12 volt, your data, and your ground words. And the back of the pixel has nothing. So that's how you can see the difference, okay? Now, I am going to actually just put these two pixel strings together, even though one is 5 volt and one is 12 volt. I just am going to use these two longer ends to show you how to put the pixels together. But if I were to input it into this string where I just cut the bad pixels out, I can see here's my longer side where I am going to add a pixel. This is the output side. So when I go to add this pixel, I'm going to add it on the output side, or I'm going to add it on the input side, so that my output comes out of this wire and goes into your input right here. Okay. And then if I was on the other side of the string, or the side that I cut off, you can see on this one, it was cut off on the input side. So if I'm adding my pixel in, I'm going to want to add the output pixel on the end. So the data is going to come into this pixel and out of this wire, and it's going out of this wire to go into this pixel. So you just want to make sure they're in the same direction. There are 3 ways recommended. There are some other ways too, but there are 3 ways recommended to solder, or to put your pixels together. One is you can go with your soldering iron. Mine's way back here. Your soldering iron, and solder them together. This works really well if you've bench tested your lights, you've discovered what's wrong, or even if you're combining strings and you're indoors and you have the ability to do that. There are also solder tubes that we sell. These work well for some people. They don't work as well for others. It's kind of, there's a learning curve in how to heat them and get them to work correctly. These work really well if you aren't by a soldering station when you need to change a pixel, Or if you don't like to solder or afraid to solder, these will work well. They also work well out during your show if you have to replace a pixel, because all you need is a heat gun. And the third option, which we also sell, is the butt crimp connectors. Same thing. These work well outside if you're making a change in your show. They do require that you have a set of crimpers to use them with. And again, everyone has different luck. Some people have luck with the solder tubes. Some people have luck with the butt crimp connectors. I have an issue using the butt crimp connectors because I can't always get the crimper to tighten enough. Darrell, on the other hand, never has a problem with the butt crimp connectors. His hand strength, I guess, is stronger than mine. He can get it to close. Both of these do have heat shrink around them. So you can seal something up outside, and you can heat it up and make a seal. That's the little red part right here, and the pink part will seal around your wire, and you'll see them both. So what I'm going to do is, there are 3 wires on a pixel. So one we're going to solder, one we're going to use the heat shrink and or the solder shrink tubing, and one we are going to use the butt crimp connectors on. You do, if you are soldering your pixels together inside, you should get some heat shrink tubing to put on them and heat shrink when you're done. If you don't have heat shrink tubing, I couldn't find ours this morning when I went to make the video. You can always wrap them up with electrical tape, which is what I'm going to do after we're done. So to get started, you're going to pick one side, or not one side, you're going to take the side that you need to solder. So here here's my input on this one. And that means I'm going to need my output on this one, which is this side. Here's my output. Not that these will work because I have 2 different versions, but it's just so you can see what to do. So these are the 2 sides we're going to connect. So what I need to do is I need to take my wire strippers, strip off a bit, on each side. I only strip the side that I'm working on. That way I don't get confused and start soldering or connecting the wrong wires to each other. It's just kind of how I do it. If you've done like I did and kind of did them extra long, you can always cut off the excess. Or you can use it. I'll show you how that works too in a second. It's not terrible. So I always start with the data. Always start with the voltage line. So for me, I peel off the side that I'm working on, and I'm going to solder first. So let me move these out of the way. And I'm going to put the side that I'm soldering onto my little clamp. There are different ways to solder these. Some people like to put solder on each of them first. I have an extra long tail thing, I have an extra long, I cut this one extra long, so I can kind of just wrap them together. That way they're held and they're in place. It's not as hard as it looks. Once they're held together and kind of squished together, they're not going to move. If you did have heat shrink tubing, you're going to want to slide your heat shrink tubing on before you go to solder. As I said, I couldn't find ours today, so I'm just going to solder. You got to heat the wires up and let the solder go on. Solder them together. Make sure you get enough on there that they have a good connection. They're not going to come off especially once you put the heat shrink on them or electrical tape them. I do solder as close to the 2 pieces of insulation as I can. My finger's getting a little close. Ooh, I might have put a little too much, but there we go. It's soldered together. You're gonna want to let it cool a second. And then once you take it off, you will see it's not going anywhere. This is very secure. Then you're gonna either take your piece of heat shrink tubing and put it up and shrink it, or if you're like me and you couldn't find that today, you can just take your electrical tape and wrap it around a couple of times. And that one got all bent up. So it's not the prettiest job, but there it goes. Now I have a connection all done. I always, especially if we're soldering them together, after we do all three, I always wrap electrical tape around the top. So I don't worry as much that this one is completely sealed and tight. I mean, I try, but I'm not gonna over tape it because I know I'm gonna put more tape on top. If you have your heat shrink tube, some people also put a bigger heat shrink on top or electrical tape. Either way works. So that is the way to solder. Next, I'm going to do my data line, and I'm going to use the butt crimp connectors. I've already said I am not as good with these as Darrell is. So hopefully they will work for me during the video. If they don't, you'll see the process either way. So taking my middle one, now that I have this extra long piece of wire that I exposed, it's not going to fit in the butt crimp connector, so you can fold it over to make it short enough. It also adds a little bit of more to grab onto when it goes in. The butt crimp connector is pretty simple. You stick one side in, twist this up so it's small. You stick one side into the tube. There is a little hole in the butt crimp connector, and you want to make sure your wire goes all the way up. There's a little hole. So you want to make sure your wire goes all the way up to the top. And then you take your crimping pliers. These are the pinkish butt crimp connectors, so you're going to use the red side of the crimping pliers, and you're going to do the half that you're in. And here's where I have issues, because my hand's just not quite strong, and it wiggles while I'm trying to move it out. But it crimps it, and then you're going to grab the middle wire on the other side, because we're doing the data wire. Same thing, you're going to stick it in, make sure it gets in the hole, squish it up as far as you can. And the same thing, this is where I always have problems with the second one. You want to make sure the wire is in there securely. Let me load it in. I will hold it on this side to make sure it holds. Try this way. I'm trying not to cover it up in the camera, but it's kind of hard. Squish it down, and then you have it done. Same thing. It's not going anywhere. It's easier for me when I can press it against the workbench. When I'm out in the yard trying to change things, as you can see, my hands don't quite reach this all the way, so it makes it harder for me to use out there. But inside, it worked for me. This is also not going anywhere, and we'll heat shrink this in a second. And the last option that we have, or that we sell, is the solder tube. Solder tube's made if you have one of our pixel replacement strings. With this longer wire, it works a little better because you can slide the solder tube on all the way, and then you can then kind of push these two together, sort of the same way. I have that extra long string again, or extra long wire exposed, so I can kind of wrap these together, so that way I know that they're going to be a secure connection, and then I can move the solder tube back on to where the the little wrap that I just made is kind of into the middle. That's how easy it is. Let me get it closer so y'all can see. You want to make sure that all the wire is inside of these little red pieces. The red pieces are going to shrink onto the insulation of the wire. And then you just take your heat gun. Let me get my stuff. If you're outside, we have an outside heat gun that we use. Works really well. It sits. I think it's DeWalt, but it sits up, and we just can pass this over the top of it. I'm inside. That's outside because we're setting up for Halloween. So I'm just gonna use the heat gun on our solder station, which gets really, really hot. So instead of keeping my hands there, I'm gonna use the clips, and that made me move it. Give me a second to set it back again. There we go. And then you are going to take your heat gun. I go one side at a time, so I heat up the side, and then I heat the solder in the middle. So I heat up one side. I'm heating up the electrical tape at the same time. I heat up the other side. There we go. And now I work on the middle, and you're going to heat it until, get this closer, till you see the solder middle section kind of break, and you can see the solder start to flow out. That's all you need to do. Once that happens, it's done. Here's where I think most people have issues with the solder tubes. You've got to let it cool and reharden before you move it too much. If you try to move it before it has, I didn't even finish the side, hold on. If you try to move it before it has had a chance to reharden, it's going to, it can pull your wires apart in here. And then your solder connection's not as good as you thought it was. It does take a while for it to reharden. It's still kind of soft, but once it rehardens, your connection should be secure. Also, while I have the heat gun out, I'm gonna switch it. I'm gonna go ahead and heat shrink the butt crimp connector so y'all can see how that hits and will shrink around the wire to give you this secure connection. Just heat it up. And it will secure on both sides. And in all of that, while I was heating things up, you can see my electrical tape that wasn't on there very well to begin with came off. So we'll just rip it off and start again. This time maybe I'll keep it nice and neat, and then we won't have that issue. There we go. Everything is still really hot from using the solder gun. Give everything some time to cool. And here's your butt crimp connector now, or not your butt crimp, your solder shrink connector. It has completely cooled. Everything is hardened back. Now that I didn't touch it, I didn't move it, I didn't change any connections, this is solid. It's not going anywhere. Here's the butt crimp connector. It was crimped. The crimp was solid, and now that the crimp is solid, I have sealed it completely. This also is not going anywhere. Both of these work really well for field repairs. Again, just the easiest way to do that. You don't have to lug a solder station out into the middle of your yard. And then here is just the soldered one that I wrapped in electrical tape. It's also not going anywhere. So I have now put these 2 pixel strings together. Again, like I said, some people use bigger shrink tubing. We always just wrap. You don't have to wrap. Everything is waterproofed there and sealed, but we always wrap it up More because I don't like to have those 3 wires apart from each other. There we go. And so now we've put 2 pixel strings together, whether you're replacing a pixel or adding other things. Thank you.